So here we are, chapter 26. We have made it. It is unbelievable that it has been 26 chapters, but hopefully right now you are feeling like you possess a wealth of knowledge. I hope that you have found the book to be excellent. It's certainly one of the better nutrition textbooks that I've seen, especially for the nursing community. There's certainly more information here than your brain could possibly process and retain, but we've covered the nuts and bolts of it. And certainly you can maintain this book as a resource and reference tool and refer back to it over the course of your remaining studies. So for your final chapter here, I want to give it some in-depth coverage. Very, very important topics in this chapter. I also have a series of video clips that I want to share with you. So I'm going to do something slightly different, and I'm actually going to read to you this first page because I really want to put some emphasis on some of the points here. So as you can see, it is estimated that up to a third of all cancers in the U.S. are related to poor diet, physical inactivity, and overweight and obesity. And so you're seeing some of that in the imagery on the hard copy assignment. Now, it has been postulated that various dietary components play a role in the prevention of cancer, whereas others have been blamed for fostering its development. It is believed that the risk and course of cancer can be blocked or suppressed at many points along the process, and herein lies the potential for nutrition to interact. And we're going to look at some videos in a moment that help to illustrate some of this. Conversely, dietary factors may potentiate or trigger the process and increase cancer risk. Laboratory studies, so think for a moment in a lab setting, which is a little different than the real world, have shown that dietary substances can affect cell mutation by inhibiting the uptake or activation of carcinogens. Other substances may slow or stop cancer cell proliferation or progression. These effects are contrasted by dietary components associated with increased cancer risk that act in the opposite fashion, fostering an increased uptake of a carcinogen or potentiating cell division. So again, we're doing these things in a lab, and most science that's done in a lab is certainly informative. It provides insight, but it's not always a definitive reflection of what happens in a real body, right? Because there are so many other mitigating factors. But there's value to all these bits and pieces when we finally put them together to form a big picture. And that's how, as you know, we form theories, which are ultimately probably going to change. They're going to develop because we gain further insight moving forward. So I think that for this last chapter here, it's important that I go back to a point made in the first chapter. And that is that nutrition science is still very much in its infancy. There is so much we don't know. Now, what's fabulous is that we know that there's a lot we don't know. So we're working with the knowledge we do have, which is rapidly evolving, which is why none of us can keep up with it. As a nutrition professional, it is my job to keep up with it. And there's so much forward progression at such a rapid pace that I struggle with that, and I'm pretty dedicated to it as an educator. So you can imagine why so many of the myths and misunderstandings prevail within the lay community or amongst other professionals who don't have a focus on this topic. And when you have an appreciation for that, it's easier to understand A, why we can't tell you a lot of things definitively, but we can give you some good advice, and B, why it seems like you hear so much conflicting stuff, because what once might have been thought may have already been changed within the matter of a very short period of time. So having that perspective is important. Now, despite the wealth of research in this area, little is known about specific roles for most food components in humans. No conclusive evidence exists that any one single dietary component is responsible for either causing or preventing cancer. Instead, adhering to an overall healthy dietary pattern and maintaining a healthy body weight are recommended over focusing on an individual nutrient or substance. And that's really the takeaway message, and it goes back again to the beginning of all this: balance, variety, moderation. not deciding, oh, I'm going to focus heavily on soy foods or I'm going to focus heavily on greens. It's all part of that bigger picture: variety, balance, and moderation. Much of the research on diet and cancer is based on animal studies. So we are looking at rats and monkeys and other animals that we know very closely mimic human anatomy and physiology, because obviously it would not be ethical nor feasible to do a lot of human clinical trials. Additionally, in vitro studies, doing things in petri dishes and lab settings, or epidemiological studies where large populations are observed over time. And that is really where most of our real world knowledge is coming from. We can do these things in animals, we can do these things in lab settings and petri dishes, but how does that translate to humans? Because humans are much more complex, right? There are a multitude of factors that impact their health, so it's very hard to single something out. You can't say I'm going to take away every nutrient and give you nothing but vitamin C to see what it does. For ethical reasons as well as obvious practical reasons, that's just not doable. And so we're looking at these factors like, hey, people live in different environments where they have different exposures that may alter how their bodies utilize nutrients. It may alter which nutrients they receive in combination with others because of dietary limitations based on geography or cultural influences. We also have to factor in the fact that any one food is composed of many different things. So there is a synergistic effect in food. And when you look at someone's dietary patterns, what are the synergistic effects amongst the foods they consume? What components are there and what components are missing based on their choices? So epidemiological studies yield associations between one's overall diet and the presence or prevalence of disease based on observation. We don't draw these direct cause and effect conclusions, so we're leaving room for all of these uncontrolled and unknown factors. We could look hypothetically at some sort of a society somewhere in the world who consumes no animal foods whatsoever for any number of reasons, and we can look at the incidence of certain disease presence in that population. And then we can go, okay, now let's look at a population that consumes a great deal of animal products, and let's examine and compare the difference in the prevalence of disease risks. And if we see more of certain disease risk present in the animal consuming population, then what that does is that tells us we want to examine what it is about animal foods that might be contributing more to the risk of those diseases that aren't occurring in the population who consumes no animal foods. So it may take us down a path to do animal studies or in vitro studies where we are looking at what is it that's in animal-based foods that causes cancer, or what are these diets heavy in animal foods displacing? Is it the animal food components that are the problem, or is it that when people eat a lot of animal foods, they don't eat a lot of other foods, and thus they don't get enough of what's in those? So you see, it may not mean that the animal foods are bad. It may mean that they're displacing plant foods that need to be more abundant in one's diet. So everything isn't always black or white. It's really those shades of gray. So as you continue, it says, for example, comparing the cancer outcome of adults who consume soy and those who do not cannot accurately quantify the possible effect of any soy intake that occurred during childhood and adolescence. Epidemiological evidence should not be equated to experimental evidence. In other words, in an experiment, you do something, you manipulate one factor or a specific factor so that you can examine cause and effect. It is very hard to get real world meanings from those experimental settings because of the multitude of other factors in the real world. So that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for associations or correlations that inform us on a larger scale or that direct us to look in more depth at specific points of concern. So the big picture, we're looking at the forest, not the individual trees. As you continue here, epidemiological evidence and clinical trials are not the same. So clinically controlled trials are considered the gold standard. Really, that's looking at, oh, we're controlling everything, so we're trying to factor out all of the things that could have an influence. But again, nothing is going to be perfect, but because it's a more controlled environment, the results are deemed to be more reliable and meaningful. And so we need more of these clinical trials in order to establish the relationship between diet and cancer risk. We know it exists, we just don't know all the nuances yet. The very nature of the disease and the difficulty in singling out potential risk factors over sufficient time are what makes sweeping conclusions about diet and cancer difficult to obtain. Observational studies can suggest a link between a diet component and disease, but when the component is isolated and studied, the outcome can change. So we are looking epidemiologically at what appear to be associations or correlations, and when we're able to do something where we can isolate out certain things and study them, we don't always confirm what we suspected, or we learn more about things we didn't see on the bigger scale. So I believe I may have mentioned this early on, and I'm going to make reference again to it now because I did my master's thesis for nutrition science on the association between pesticides and cancer. And the overwhelming evidence does not indicate that the pesticide residues on our foods are putting us at high risk for cancer. What we know are that exposures to high dose pesticides are a factor. So if you are a farmer applying it, then you are at greater risk. Now, ideally, you're a farmer in this country and you're using all kinds of protective gear, but there are parts of the world where they're struggling more financially and maybe they're not using protective gear, so there is a much higher incidence of pesticide-related cancer in those scenarios. And most certainly, if you are living within a certain distance, say 20-mile radius of farms that are applying pesticides, then the wind drift is increasing your exposure and you're not going through your life wearing protective gear, so you are at greater risk. But guess what? You got to take it even a step further. Some of us, as you now know, have genes that are inherently more protective from certain diseases. So you and I may both live within 20 miles of that farm, but my genes are primed to make me more susceptible to the influences of that exposure than yours. Hence, the trigger in me will be different than in you. So there are a multitude of factors. Nothing is a direct line. When we look at the pesticide residues on foods, the amount that's deemed acceptable is well below the amount known to cause harm. And so when we study what amount is on those foods, we're seeing amount that is far below that which would be indicative of any risk. And it's not as if the amount on a given food is a risk. We try to extrapolate that to if somebody was consuming the appropriate amount of foods to meet their needs that would have residues of pesticides, what would their cumulative risk be based on these incredibly low amounts compared to what would definitively be problematic? Most of us are hopefully washing produce before we use it, and therefore whatever residues there are being minimized even further than whatever we tested them for at a checkpoint. And additionally, sometimes you're peeling foods, right? And so we don't eat the skin of everything. Your cantaloupe, you're cutting it open, so that is a protective outer shell. But again, how would we know? Stop and ask yourself, how would we know if the pesticide residues on foods were attributable to human cancers? Well, we would have to have a large sample size, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to study accurately so that we could find definitive connections. Well, we're going to need to know what those people ate every single day of their life since they were born up until the point that they were diagnosed with cancer. Because you see, we're going to need to find a dose dependent relationship, right? We need to know how much pesticide these individuals were exposed to make a connection between that and the onset of cancer. So not only would that be completely impossible for someone to do, to recollect everything that they've eaten, but oh, by the way, they have no clue how much pesticide was on those foods, nor what pesticides were used. So we're going to need to know where they got all that food, and then we're going to need to trace it back to the farms and find out what pesticides they used and how much. You're starting to realize how ludicrous it is to assume that we can draw these kinds of direct lines. We simply cannot. So what we can do is we can say high dose pesticide exposures for those in those situations, wind drift, application, and other scenarios, are definitely unwise. And then some people can choose to go, well, any exposure is unwise. I'd say that's debatable because you're exposed to all kinds of carcinogenic potential substances in your environment every day. And the purpose of your immune system is to combat that. And one of the key roles of nutrition, when you are getting what your body needs to best fortify itself, is to help you to do just that, to further fight those things which may potentially harm you. So you see, the idea behind a healthy diet is to help you combat all of the things that present harm, including constituents of the diet that can potentially present harm. So if you want to wage the battle, look at the overall healthy aspects of lifestyle: adequate sleep, adequate physical activity that helps build immunity and helps optimize function of all bodily systems, stress reduction, which helps to minimize the negative impacts that are physiologically accruing from high levels of stress and therefore weakening our immune systems and body system functioning, and healthy diet patterns overall that help to fortify and strengthen your body's ability to combat all that it encounters. Don't get hung up on the details like the potential little bit of pesticide exposure in your diet. Again, that's losing sight of the forest for the trees. So as we continue here and you look at the bottom, it tells you let's see, observational studies can suggest a link between a diet component and a disease, but when the component is isolated and studied, an outcome can change. An example of this finding is illustrated by the famous clinical trial that found increased lung cancer risk among smokers taking beta-carotene supplements when observational studies of a diet high in fruits and vegetables that naturally contain beta-carotene studies suggested otherwise. So what that's telling you, beta carotene, if you recall, is vitamin A, and we realize that it is very protective to have diets high in beta carotene from foods because that is a precursor or provitamin form, and your body's going to utilize it in a different way, whereas people taking vitamin A supplements or a supplement containing high amounts of vitamin A, actually those mega doses, if they smoke in combination with that, increase the risk for cancer. So one more example of how food reigns supreme over supplements. Now, this box here, I definitely encourage you to take a look at. All of the things that are listed here have in some way been referenced previously. Increased alcohol intake, that above moderation, which you should recall is 1 drink a day for women, 2 for men. Alcohol in higher intakes is associated with increased risk of numerous cancers. Many of us as women are worried about breast cancer. Well, if you're drinking too much, that's one of the first things that you want to cut back on. Don't fool yourself into thinking that lots of red wine is your savior. The point is the alcohol. High fat intake. Now, we're usually worried about the high intakes of the saturated fats, right? So it's not simply a matter of cardiovascular disease when we talk about saturated fats. More and more people are choosing to believe that, more meats and dairy are acceptable in terms of cardiovascular disease. Fine. But that doesn't mean that they're not harmful in other ways. So again, you gotta look at the big picture. Low intakes of fruits and vegetables mean low intakes of fiber, antioxidant phytochemicals. many of which we still don't understand, but that we realize have great value, so we know that that's problematic. We have drawn many obvious correlations between overweight and obesity, including the fact that the more adipose tissue you have, the more estrogen production you have in your body. And higher exposures to estrogen increases the risk of many estrogen receptor positive cancers. So literally, too much body fat increases cancer risk in both men and women. Processed red meat, so your hams, your sausages, your bacons, and red meat in general, because of the high iron content, as we've looked at before, increase risk. Now, soy, once upon a time, everybody thought that exposure to soy was the problem. So we thought, hey, soy contains these phytochemicals called isoflavones, and they mimic estrogen. So if they mimic estrogen, it's like you're being exposed to more estrogen, and more estrogen exposure increases cancer risk. Oh my gosh. But again, what we initially saw enticed us to do further studies, and lo and behold, it led us down a path that was very insightful. Because of the fact that those isoflavones mimic estrogen, they are not estrogen, the body just thinks they are, then those estrogen-like substances tend to bind to estrogen receptor sites on cells where estrogen would have been able to bind, thereby blocking the estrogen binding effect and thereby being chemopreventive. In other words, they get in the way of estrogen attaching to an estrogen receptor site, and that protects the body from that high influence of estrogen. So we now see just the opposite, that soy is more protective from cancer, not causative. You can see how good news doesn't travel nearly as fast as bad news. Now, sugar. There's a lot of misinformation about sugar. Sugar is not causing increased cancer risk. This is through people that either don't know science well or that have an agenda to drive. It might be their website, their book, their protocol that they're selling. Cells, as you know, must be fueled by glucose, all cells, both those which are damaged and mutating into cancers and those which are healthy, and there is no way to specifically target certain cells or not. So when you deprive your body of fuel, glucose, you're depriving all cells equally, and that's going to impair health. And impaired health may in fact be what fosters the progression of carcinogenic mutations that lead to cancer. And vitamin supplementation. Long-term studies have yet to link the use of multivitamin supplements with reduced risk of cancer. Again, we know that some supplements are actually harmful in excess. And more importantly, we know that food has synergistic value, the interactions between its components that we do not yet fully understand because they are so complex is where the magic lies. That's what's doing the wonderful things that we want to get from food. When we don't mess with things as nature created them, we tend to benefit. And if we focus on consuming those things that nature understands better than we do, then we're going to get what we should get, not too much and not too little. It's when we start taking things and manipulating them that we tend to get ourselves in trouble. So I have several video clips up here at the top of my screen that I'm going to click on in a moment and share with you. But before I do that, let's complete this page. So in bold print, you see antioxidants and phytochemicals. And you know already that phyto is plant, so plant chemicals. Nuts, seeds, legumes or beans, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, all foods that are plant-based are going to contain phytochemicals. As you know, some vitamins function as antioxidants, but many phytochemicals also function as antioxidants. Anti means oppose, so substances that oppose or combat or fight oxidation are antioxidants. Well, what is oxidation? Oxidation is a process by where the body is breaking down things chemically through oxygen use, oxidation. And so I'm going to show you that in a moment as well so that you can begin to connect some of these dots. So we want lots of antioxidants as vitamins that come from a multitude of foods and as substances provided through the mechanism of action of phytochemicals. So as you go through here, you can see a little bit of that explained. And when you get down to the bottom, it says, national recommendations on diet and cancer do not outline single foods or nutrients and specific cancers because these relationships are uncertain. Instead, general guidelines advise broader healthy behaviors associated with overall risk reduction, which is now what I have explained to you. When you look right here in this box, the practice pearl, very, very important to understand about the synergistic effects, so read this carefully as well. And as I continue to the next page, I want to point out that up here you see those same key points that I've already reiterated, so you can just glance over that. And now I'm going to share with you a series of video clips. So let's begin with the role of antioxidants and free radicals.
Healthy tissue cells. Entering a tissue cell through the cell membrane. There are many elements in our body that comprise molecules. An electron from the outer bonding shell of one element forms a bond with the outer bonding second element, forming what is called a chemical bond. During oxidation, an electron can be knocked out of the chemical bond, resulting in a highly reactive free radical, where an unshared electron occurs. Oxidation factors include poor diet, pollution, drugs, radiation, stress, injury, aging, and infection. Disease risk include cancer, heart disease, arthritis, autoimmune disease, and over 90 other diseases. This free radical can capture electrons from normal healthy molecules and create free radicals that damage the healthy molecules, such as molecules found in DNA. The damaged cell can release free radicals and continue the effects of oxidative stress to surrounding cells. To prevent or reverse these very destructive processes, the body constantly needs a reservoir of antioxidant molecules. Antioxidants are important in defending against free radicals. Antioxidant molecules have extra electrons and can supply electrons to neutralize free radicals. The antioxidants travel through blood vessels to reach the damaged cells. The antioxidant molecule will supply the free radical with an electron to repair and stabilize the chemical bond. In supplying electrons, The antioxidant molecules do not themselves become free radicals. Frequent healthy dosages of a variety of antioxidants will assure this destructive oxidation process will be minimized, reducing the potential for cancer, heart disease, autoimmune disease, and diabetes, not to mention their importance in anti-aging.
There are thousands of phytochemicals that will never make it onto the side of a cereal box, but may play a role in reducing the risk of chronic diseases. And that's just the ones we know about. We know whole plant foods have consistently been found to be protective, and so it's reasonable for scientists to try to find the magic bullet active ingredient to sell it in a pill, but pills simply cannot mimic this balanced, natural combination of phytochemicals present in fruits and vegetables. When isolated out, compounds may lose their activity or behave differently. The antioxidant and anti-cancer activities of plant foods is thought to derive from the additive or synergistic effects, meaning the whole may be greater than the sum of its parts. This helps explain why a pill simply cannot replace the complex interaction of phytochemicals present in whole plant foods. As T. Colin Campbell has pointed out, more than 100 trials overwhelmingly show no long-term benefit of vitamin supplements, along with worrisome findings that certain supplements may even increase risk for diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And supplementation with fish oil appears useless or worse, yet the science doesn't seem to matter. People continue to buy it. The public desire for quick fixes through pills is overwhelming, especially when money can be made. Each plant has thousands of different phytochemicals, and each plant has a whole different phytonutrient profile, and so there may be synergistic effects when consuming different foods together as well. Just like eating beta-carotene in carrot form is more beneficial than in pill form because of all the other compounds in the carrot that may synergize with the beta-carotene, when you dip that carrot in hummus, all of a sudden you have the thousands of carrot compounds mixing with the thousands of chickpea compounds. And that's what this study was all about. What happens if you mix different fruits with different vegetables with different beans? Combining foods between different categories did indeed increase the likelihood of synergy. For example, here's the antioxidant power of raspberries alone, and here's the antioxidant activity of adzuki beans alone. So if there was strictly an additive effect, the expected combination would come up to here. But the observed antioxidant power of the combination came out more than either eaten alone. What about anti-cancer effects? What if you repeated the study, but this time tried dripping different combination of foods on breast cancer cells growing in a petri dish? Sometimes you can get the same synergistic effects. Here's what grapes can do to breast cancer cells, suppressing their growth about 30%. But onions worked even better, cutting breast cancer growth in half. Now, if you added half of each together, you'd assume you'd get somewhere in the middle between the two, right? They'd average each other out. But instead, the researchers got this, suppressing cancer cell growth by up to like 70%. So the whole plus the whole was greater than the sum of the whole parts. So did they recommend people eat a variety of foods? Maybe add some raisins along with some chopped red onion to your next salad? Where's the money in that? No, the reason they were investigating the different types of interactions was to identify mixtures that could ultimately lead to the development of something like grape-flavored Funyuns or something.
This page, you could easily go to this page yourself. You can see the address right up here. You can type in common cancer myths, and NCI or NIH, and either way it'll come up. So cancer.gov. Remember, .gov is a reliable web address. You will see here that it addresses all kinds of things. Will eating sugar make my cancer worse? No. Although research has shown that cancer cells consume more sugar than normal cells, no studies have shown that eating sugar will make your cancer worse, or that if you stop eating sugar, your cancer will shrink or disappear. Do artificial sweeteners cause cancer? No. You can read more about that here if you feel like you're questioning this. Is cancer contagious? Does attitude have anything to do with all of this? Interesting things worth a read. Can cancer get worse exposed to air or cell phones or power lines? Are there herbal products that can cure cancer? No. All of these things, antiperspirants, deodorant, hair dye, common myths and misconceptions that I would highly recommend you take a few moments to check out. Now, here I want to share with you too that the soy debate, and this again is going to be .org you see up here, and so this is healthcare organization, an actual hospital health system. There are plenty of hospital health systems that have information on soy and cancer myths and misconceptions. This is just one that is particularly well done, so I chose to share this with you. And this talks about what I was explaining verbally a few moments ago. So all of these soy myths. So once again, if you want to go to this, elcaminohealth.org, you could simply type in soy and cancer myth, El Camino Health, and this would come up for you as well. Let's check out this video.
There's so many different myths that people have about cancer, about a lot of different things related to health, but about cancer in particular. But there's a lot that we do know about cancer and a lot of things that we can share with people about how they can reduce the risk of cancer. We know a lot of how people can reduce the risk of cancer. First and foremost, don't smoke. That is the leading cause of preventable cancer deaths. And for the majority of people who don't smoke in this country, the most important things they can do to reduce the risk of cancer are to eat right and be more active. We also know certainly staying out of the sun, using sunscreen, putting on a hat, long sleeve clothes during those peak sun hours are important. And so there's a lot of things people can do to reduce the risk, but the bottom line is you can do all the quote-unquote right things and unfortunately still get cancer, but for many different types of cancer, there are these prevention factors. I love talking about superfoods because everybody thinks that there's, a food or a food group in particular that can, solve all your cancer problems and reduce your cancer risk. And the evidence just isn't there on that. What we see from an evidence perspective is that it really is that overall dietary pattern that makes a difference. Now, I say that, but there certainly are foods that I think of as superfoods that are really, really healthy and really packed with nutrients, and we should be eating a lot of those types of foods. Colorful fruits and vegetables, whole grains, healthy protein sources, salmon, fish, beans, tofu. So a lot of those foods in my mind are superfoods, if you will, and we should be eating those, but not with the idea that any one of those is going to reduce our risk of cancer. One thing I hear all the time is sugar feeds cancer cells. And the bottom line is sugar feeds all of our cells, including cancer cells as well. So there's nothing really specific about sugar directly causing cancer, or if you have cancer, sugar causing those cancer cells to grow more or faster. But the issue is we eat a lot of sugar in this country. And a lot of that sugar is contributing to the overweight obesity epidemic that we're seeing today, which does impact cancer risk. There's been a lot of research done looking at green tea and coffee, for example, and do these have an impact on cancer risk? I would say the jury's still out on those things. However, the issue with tea, green tea in particular, packed with antioxidants. And we know that the antioxidants in fruits and vegetables are protective against cancer. What we don't really know yet is, are those antioxidants in tea protective against cancer? And same thing with coffee. There have been some interesting studies lately looking at coffee and cancer risk. And the jury's still out. We don't know. I encourage people, if you like to drink coffee, that's fine. Watch sweeteners that you're adding to your tea or your coffee, because those calories can add up. But yeah, from a cancer perspective, we just don't have the evidence to say, drink coffee, drink green tea, it's going to reduce your cancer risk.
Now, all of that said, below this lecture link, you're going to see a link to this video, Can We Eat to Starve Cancer? While the last video mentioned that we don't have a lot of evidence, we do have ever-growing evidence. She was giving you kind of a brief summary. No, we can't say green tea will prevent cancer. The other thing is it's dose dependent, right? I mean, everything is dose dependent. The dose makes the poison. The dose also determines the positive benefits. So how much green tea would one have to drink? But we're learning more and more all the time. And this right here is one of the most impressionable videos you will ever see. It's about 20 minutes long, and if you bear with it, he's going to take you to a very insightful endpoint regarding food. So I think that you will find it incredibly beneficial. So I encourage you not to skip that. Now, that being said, we move into the next section looking at the nutrition challenges with both cancer and HIV. And let me remind you that HIV is not AIDS. There are still a lot of people that don't really intellectualize that detail, right? The human immunodeficiency virus is just that. It is a virus that compromises the immune system. Should it compromise the immune system to the degree that one begins to contract and manifest actual HIV-related diseases, such as Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a cancer specific to those with HIV, then at the point that those diseases begin to manifest, those comorbid conditions, then the person is said to have acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Remember, a syndrome is a cluster of problems or abnormalities. So usually someone who has progressed so far that their immune system is so compromised that they start to have this problem and this problem and this problem, that cluster of things related specifically to this virus is a collection or a syndrome. Hence, AIDS is the acronym for those words. So we have more people in today's world that are HIV positive and thriving than ever before because we have amazing drug cocktails. And a cocktail just means a whole combination of therapy, right? So if someone is referring to their HIV drug cocktail, they mean a certain combination of medications that comprises their specific regimen that enables them to keep all of their cell levels where they should be so that they are otherwise healthy. And it's only should they not be able to obtain those medications anymore, which is possible for a variety of reasons, including cost, that they might progress to AIDS. So while we haven't cured it yet, we have found stellar ways to manage and maintain circumstances. So ultimately, when it comes down to both conditions, cancer and HIV infection present similar challenges to the nutritional health of the patient. Both diseases share the similarities that disease symptoms and treatments can jeopardize nutrition status. For example, anorexia, which remember means absence of appetite, altered taste perception, and pain are issues with both diseases. Nausea and diarrhea from radiation therapy or from antiviral drugs, the drug cocktails, can lead to diminished intake and cause nutrient losses. A further similarity is that the lack of a universal medical cure for either disease leaves open the possibility that patients may try alternative medicine or dangerous quackery in hopes of improved survival. Some alternative treatments are known to jeopardize the success of conventional treatment, such as the concomitant use of St. John's wort, common herbal supplement, and either protease inhibitors used to decrease the viral load with HIV infection or anti-rejection drugs used in bone marrow transplant for certain cancers. So you see, once again in this last chapter, supplements are harmful when not used with proper supervision. People don't know what they don't know. The people that are promoting the supplements are rarely the properly educated individuals. If someone's selling a product, they are selling something to make money through sales. If they were someone who's highly educated in health sciences, they wouldn't be out there selling products. Always question the source of your information, the website, the person, the store, the merchant or vendor. There are great applications for some supplements when medically appropriate, as advised by a qualified health professional. But there are so many unknowns and so many known conflicts known only to well-trained people that you need to encourage people, and for your own self, to wisely make the move, to make sure that you are getting proper education, not by Googling, but by consulting with a qualified and knowledgeable professional. Yes, that's usually going to be a registered dietitian. When we look at this next section, cachexia, right? Cachexia. So cachexia, or wasting, when you picture that emaciated appearance, that's what you're talking about. And I'm going to encourage you to read this section or the remainder of it on your own. Medical nutrition therapy and cancer, the nurse should be aware that the risk of weight loss, cachexia, and malnutrition in cancer can occur because of decreased dietary intake, nutrient losses, again, vomiting, diarrhea, or unmet elevated nutritional needs caused by the disease or its treatment. So remember, we've got a lot of metabolic stress. A high level of physiological stress is taking place and therefore increasing energy, calorie, and nutrient needs. So when one's in a hypermetabolic state, all of their needs increase. If they're having diarrhea and vomiting, they are not able to meet their needs due to losses. If they are having nausea, they may not want to eat, therefore their intake is compromised. So you've got a multitude of things taking place. And again, I'm going to let you go through the rest of this on your own and answer the questions accordingly. Disease-related nutrition risk factors. The nurse should assess the patient at the time of diagnosis and at regular intervals for disease-related symptoms that negatively affect nutrition status. That loss of appetite, that altered taste perception, the metallic taste that you know some people experience, and of course pain. As you go through here, notice the words in bold print. That altered taste has a name, dysgeusia, as well as that metallic taste. And, you know, I have heard this pronounced so many different ways. But cacogeusia is how I would say it, and I'm going to be honest, not too many people say it. We just say metallic taste because it's easier. Odynophagia, when you look down here, upper intestinal tumors or those of the head and neck can cause dysphagia and odynophagia, or painful swallowing. So all of these are going to be factors, right? You can go through the rest of this independently. I'm going to, at this point out some key things. Treatment. All types of cancer treatment can have profound effects on nutrition status. So the disease itself is an issue. The treatment is a whole nother level of issue, right? I know that a lot of people have probably heard that juicing is wise, so let me touch on that. I understand and appreciate why people would believe this, because you are under the impression that if you extract all of these valuable components and they are thus in a concentrated form, that you're going to get a lot more of them. But there are a couple of problems there. When people juice, which means they run produce through a machine that extracts the liquid, the water, and therefore anything that is diluted within it, the solvents, what they are doing is leaving behind many valuable components. Fiber, which we know has chemopreventive effects, as well as other health benefits outside of cancer. So all that's in the pulp that's being captured in a receptacle to be discarded, as well as the fact that many of the nutrients are bound up in that mass that you're going to discard. So when you're doing the juicing part, you're getting a lot of concentrated things, but you're leaving many things behind. So the idea is to focus on the whole food. So if somebody had one of these powerful blenders like I guess a Vitamix or something, and they puree or liquefy the whole foods, you put in an apple, a carrot, and kale or whatever, that's completely different because you're getting the synergist effects of the whole foods. You're getting all of the components. That would be much more valuable. If someone is determined to engage in juicing, what I tell them is, fine, drink that juice, but don't discard that pulp. Freeze it in bags and use it to make other things. Use it to make some sort of a quick bread, like people would make banana bread. Use some whole wheat flour and use the pulp from all of that produce instead, and you're going to have a fiber-dense, nutrient-dense food that you can consume. And oftentimes people nauseated bread products are very appealing, so that kind of strikes all the, or rather checks all the boxes, so to speak. If you can help people to understand these things, you can meet them where they are and not just bash something like juicing. Instead, find a compromise. Oftentimes, you're going to have a better buy-in from the individual. So as you go through that, consider the details that are outlined here as you address the questions. Nutrition intervention for many patients with cancer, preventing weight loss and malnutrition is a vital component of their care. For others, issues of weight management are important. Each patient with cancer has individual nutritional needs dictated by the type of cancer, the treatment plan, and the accompanied symptoms and side effects. And so it's going to change throughout the duration of treatment and recovery. So again, everything has to be very individualized, both to the circumstances and the person. And everything is evolutionary in nature. I'm going to let you read this section on your own as well. Let's see. At the bottom here, in the United States, the use of dietary supplements by patients with cancer is widespread despite expert guidelines that advise against their use. Although data on the use of dietary supplements, including herbs, are limited with regard to cancer treatment, some patients choose to combine this nutrition intervention with conventional treatment. A careful nursing assessment should yield information on any use of dietary supplements so that a discussion can follow about potential consequences. The clinical data concerning use and safety of dietary supplements in cancer occurs along a continuum, with some supplements seeming to do no harm and some no good, whereas others have potentially dangerous consequences. The nurse should educate the patient about known risks associated with certain dietary supplements that either interfere with conventional cancer treatment or have serious side effects. As you go through this, remember that in most settings where you would be dealing with cancer patients, such as the cancer program at a hospital or in an outpatient setting, you're going to have a registered dietitian on staff specific to that need. So there are dietitians who specialize in oncology, which is cancer, right? So you're not going to have to know all this off the top of your head, but the more appreciation you have for it, not only are you able to better help your patients if you are their only resource, but you are better able to be a part of an interdisciplinary team and know when to defer to others so that people do get the comprehensive care that they deserve. Looking over here, the nurse should be alert to the fact that unusual side effects or lack of response to effective medications could signal the use of dietary supplements during treatment, so the patient should be encouraged to discuss dietary supplement use at each treatment visit so that a collaborative decision can be made regarding the safety of these products during treatment. And you have all these wonderful charts here that you can reference. Now, when we move on to HIV infection, medical nutrition therapy is essential throughout the course of this process. Some patients experience medication side effects, including intestinal systems, what we would term GI distress. Their weight is influenced. Many of them promote weight gain, and thus they result in obesity, and that has concomitant effects as well. And so we also know that the flip side is that many people, especially with disease progression, experience malnutrition and wasting. So there may be problems unique to the management of HIV during the management phase, and should it progress to the AIDS stage, then everything is going to flip or swing to the other end of the pendulum. So HIV-associated wasting was a nutritional challenge and especially prevalent in earlier years before the development of these present drug treatment options. Yet a subset of individuals living with HIV are still at risk of this syndrome, such as injection drug users and those with high viral loads or food insecurity. Remember, people with HIV are people, so they have a multitude of other problems. They may have other health problems that they had before that. They may already have diabetes or cardiovascular disease or kidney failure, or they may be people living in a food secure situation, or they may have other situations like mental illness. It's never simple because people are not simple. So as you peruse these next pages, the study guide or rather what you call your chapter assignment, but ultimately you're creating a study guide, right, will guide you through what's important. Virus-related nutrition risk factors. You have this great chart right here that gives you some perspective. Again, you're never expected to memorize it. It tells you at the bottom here, the nurse should include assessment of the patient's psychosocial history when considering nutritional health. So to my point, many other factors in their lifestyle, right? Intravenous drug use, poverty, homelessness, all of these are factors that have to be considered. I have patients that are on dialysis that also have cancer that resulted from the HIV that they have, and that person is homeless. So we are going to encounter in our careers really unique scenarios that the average person just often can't even wrap his or her head around. Everybody wants to think this person has this. Very seldomly will that be the case. And that person is going to have a lot of instability in other ways. Even if they were financially stable before their disease process, the costs associated with treatment of their disease or the loss of income associated with missed work or subsequent unemployment are going to have financial impacts, guys. So holistically, as we wrap up this course, let me remind you that you have to keep a focus on the person to best help them. And there isn't always a perfect solution to everything. Oftentimes, we are using subjective judgment in healthcare to determine what is the best intervention or the most relevant intervention in the scheme of things. As you look here, there's the information about children. I don't normally give you questions targeting that, but my assumption is that you are paying attention to those things. You can see many of the medication side effects so that you have some familiarity with the fact that treatment, as you know, oftentimes is going to have an effect on people that is undesirable. So that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier when we spoke in terms of many things having negative effects, despite the fact that that was not the intention. So we have to look at that as well. Lipodystrophy. So lipo tells you it's fat. Lipodystrophy is described as abnormalities in fat distribution in the body, and dyslipidemia. So elevated lipid levels. Abnormal is abnormal lipids in persons affected with HIV. That's a very unique consideration to be aware of. And then again, it speaks to some of those supplement and medication interactions specific to HIV. So on that note, I will stop and I will let you complete the chapter independently. Ask any of your final questions while you can. And I really want to thank all of you who hung in there. And I do hope that you are feeling rewarded by the experience. And I would like all of you to know that if I can ever be of help to you in being successful in any of your other courses, or I could be a point of reference for you for a project or a need, please reach out. You know how to reach me through email. Thanks.